see you again, and we always appreciate your participation. Real quick, so I'll start sharing my screen here in just a second. But real quick, it looks like we have one phone number on here just to make sure we know who this is. Whose phone number is it that ends in 0387? If you can just unmute and let us know.
Sorry, I was unmuting myself. This is Dan Pabone. I'm having a little technical issue with the Zoom right now, so I may be on this for a little bit.
Okay, no problem. Just wanted to make sure we knew who we had. So I will go ahead and share my screen, and we'll jump in and go through a couple of slides, but we'll also just do a quick roll call as well. So let's see. Glad everybody could find us. Hopefully it was easier now with Zoom than it was on Teams. Oops, not that.
All right, there you
go. Okay, can you guys see the presentation now?
No.
No? I had it just a second ago.
No.
It was here and then it left.
Hi, John.
Hey.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we'll go ahead and let's see. This is the agenda for today. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with introductions like we have in the past. I'll go over the same slides that we did before for purpose and ground rules and meeting format and our goals for implementation. But we want to obviously spend most of the time today on getting your feedback on different concepts and some outstanding questions that we have after the 4 previous meetings where we got a lot of information before. And then we're going to leave 15 minutes at the end today for public comment. So if there's public viewers out there, in order to sign up for public comment and you're an attendee, you can raise your hand. You could do that now, or you can do that at the end. But we'll leave the 15 minutes at the end. So we'll stop at around 4:15 and allow for 15 minutes of public comment. So just real quick, let's go ahead and check to see who we have here. So Ashley, you're here, and making sure everybody's mic works too. So if you can just say hello.
Yep, I'm here. Hi, everyone.
All right. Councilwoman Black, I know, had to be a little bit late. She was running a committee meeting that was going till 3 o'clock. How about Councilwoman Sita Baca? No. Councilman Hines? They might be in those same committee meetings. Kenneth Allison. Hi, Ken.
Present.
And we've got Anshul Baga from the Denver City Attorney's Office.
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Anshul. John Bailey.
Yep.
Sarah Belstock.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Truman Bradley.
Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Hello. Diane Cook. I haven't seen her yet. Sean Coleman.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Sean. Jacqueline Fluke.
Yes, hello.
Hello. Michelle Garcia.
Hi.
Hello. Michelle Hollings.
Hello.
Hello. Andrew Howard, Lieutenant Howard. No. Clarissa Creek.
Hi, guys.
Hello. Henny Leslie.
Here.
Hi, Henny. Jason Moore.
Hey, everyone, I'm here.
Hi, Jason. Dan Pabone. Hopefully we still have you. Dan, are you there? We had him a minute
I'm here.
ago, so let us know if you're, oh, hi, Dan. Jessica Scardina.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Jessica. Ian, Steve, I know Ian was going to be in and out. Are you happen to be here yet, Ian? I can't see everybody. All right. Ryan Tatum.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Art Way.
Hello, I'm here.
Hi, Art.
Hi.
And Sarah Woodson.
I'm here. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Sarah. Okay, let me go. So just a reminder, if there are viewers, general public viewing, you can email the marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. If you want to confirm your attendance or if you have any questions that you want to ask during the meeting. And then again, if you're called in through the phone and you want to sign up for a public comment and you can't use the raise your hand feature, you can email that email address as well, which is marijuanainfo@denvergov.org. So just a quick reminder of our purpose and ground rules for being here today. This is the Marijuana Licensing Work Group, and we're here to review and discuss and make recommendations on policy direction around possible marijuana licensing laws. This is advisory in nature. The work group members can review and discuss different regulatory topics, but any ordinance changes would need City Council approval ultimately. We're happy you're all here today, and we value your backgrounds and perspectives, and so really want to encourage you to speak up and be candid and provide us your subject matter expertise, and just ask that everybody on the committee be respectful and have courteous dialogue. Everybody has a valuable, perspective and input to bring to this conversation, so we want to make sure that they feel like they can voice those opinions and feel like they're being heard. So you guys have always been that way, so I expect it will be that way again today. And just real quickly, meeting format will be similar to the last 4 that we had. We're obviously on Zoom now instead, but not much will be different other than that. If you want to speak up as a work group member, feel free to just go ahead and unmute and chime in whenever a question is asked or there's an open discussion happening. If you want to use the raise hand feature, you're welcome to do that. If you feel like you're just not getting a chance to chime in, please go ahead and use the raise hand feature. And then, if we don't have a chance for written vocal comment today, feel free to go ahead and submit written comments going forward as well. And then for public input, I think I explained all that. You can go ahead and use the raise hand feature for public comment towards the end of the meeting. We'll stop at 4:15 and have 15 minutes of public comment. All written comment, we ask that it be submitted by October 6th, but it's, the sooner the better. The earlier we get your feedback, the easier it is for us to incorporate that feedback into our decisions. But obviously, if it doesn't come in by October 6th, we'll take your feedback, up until as long as, we get everything submitted to go through the legislative process. But like I said, the earlier it gets in, the easier it is for us to incorporate it. So I think I will stop there and just check in with Ashley and see if she has anything that she wants to chime in with real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. As we start our final meeting here, I want to say thanks to Molly. Molly, you've done an amazing job. We really appreciate everything you've done. And if anybody on this committee wants to hear a good sort of analysis of the process that Molly put together, there's a podcast called Weed Wonks, episode 44. Molly was interviewed by Jordan Wellington, and he was just talking about this process. And Molly, Jordan's comments were just so spot on with you. Thank you for everything you've done. And one of the things that he said that really resonated with me was he said what you did and how you put this together was about good government. We have a big issue, a complicated issue, and you didn't put your head in the sand. You came up with a plan, brought everybody to the table. So I thought that was really great. So if anybody on our call is interested in hearing that, that's Weed Wonks, episode 44. The other thing I want to say is thanks to all of you. We've learned so much. Even just this last week, we've talked to a number of you have reached out to us. We've had phone calls, we've had meetings. We now already have over 70 written comments. So that's just great. We've got so much great information. And just also a quick shout out. So thank you. And another thing that has been great is John Bailey's BCEI meetings. I think all of us have participated probably in, I know I've participated in one or two, and then a number of our team members have participated in it. We've gotten to hear even more conversations about equity in cannabis. And then finally, I want to give a shout out to our national partners. I know we've got Seattle, a great partner, listening in today. We've had California listen in. We've had New York listen in. We've had, I heard that today we have the National Cannabis Business, National Association of Cannabis Businesses on the phone listening in, so welcome. We've had, national media listening and some national stories. So that's been great. We've learned a lot. Molly, thanks for your leadership on this. And also thanks to our state counterparts. In addition to Ian being on the call, I know some of our state counterparts have listened in. So thanks, guys. You really helped set us up for the next step. And thanks again to Molly.
All right. Thank you. That was very nice of you. And yes, I had a fun time talking to Jordan on that podcast. So so check it out. And it's all thanks to the work you guys are able to do too, and the important feedback that you're providing to us. So thank you. So quickly, we'll go over these goals of implementation are nothing new. These are the same that you saw in the previous meetings. But as we stated then, we want to just make sure that we're looking at everything with this kind of new phase of marijuana regulation for Denver with an equity lens. So that's really at the core and the center of what we're talking about today and the decisions that we're making. But at the same time, we have to meet these other goals of implementation too, and we really try to balance them all together. So we want to meet the needs of the businesses, the residents, and the visitors of Denver. We want to consider what thoughtful, responsible implementation looks like. We want it to be the things we implement to be enforceable and operational and efficient. And then we also want to ensure the health, safety, and well-being of our city. So those are really the things that we kind of keep in the back of our minds as we're making these decisions and having these discussions. So now we'll jump into the meat of the discussion. And you saw this slide in the previous meetings as well. This is really how we have framed kind of or set out our work plan or our decision-making flow in how to develop an equity program for Denver. So the first thing we thought we needed to do was define the social equity applicant. Then we wanted to define or develop the services and benefits that are available to those social equity applicants. And then finally identify the licenses that would be included in that program. And so we'll talk specifically about all of these, but we're kind of going to take it a little bit out of order today. We'll talk about the definition of a social equity applicant, and then we'll kind of jump to identifying the licenses because there's several questions in that middle one around developing the services and benefits for social equity applicants. And so there's a couple of questions on those, and so I just wanted to take them a little bit out of order today. So in this first question, defining what a social equity applicant is, since we last met, the state had its work groups, this rulemaking work groups over the summer, and they also put out some proposed rules, I think just last week or maybe the week before. And so just to review those really quickly, their rules and the combination of what was in statute as well as what's in rule or proposed rules for social equity licensee is that they must be a Colorado resident who individually or together with the other social equity licensees owns at least 51% of the marijuana business license and has not been subjected to legal or disciplinary action by the state licensing authority, resulting in revocation. And then they have to demonstrate one of the following. So just one of these three. The first one being that they have to have resided for 15 or more years between the years of 1980 and 2010 in an opportunity zone, which is defined by the Office of Economic Development opportunity zones, and then also or disproportionate impacted area. And then this is where the MED has proposed a little bit more detail around what that disproportionate impacted area means. And so for them and their proposal, it means it's defined as a census tract in the top 15th percentile for the state in at least two of the following categories as measured by the Census Bureau. the number of residents in the census tract receiving public assistance, the number of residents in the census tract falling below the poverty level, the number of residents in the census tract failing to graduate high school, and the number of residents in the census tract who are unemployed. So 2 of those criteria, but then if you meet those 2, then it's just that one, the number 1 that you would then have to meet to qualify. And if you don't qualify in that first one, then the applicant can be themselves or an immediate family was arrested, convicted, or suffered civil asset forfeiture due to a marijuana offense, or their household income did not exceed 50% of the state median income as measured by the number of people who reside in the applicant's household. So this is what the Marijuana Enforcement Division has proposed. Obviously, it's not final yet. We'll see if any changes are made between this proposal and the final adopted rule. And I don't know if anybody was able to chime in last week to the proposed rulemaking hearing, but there was an interesting presentation that Jack Reed did talking about how they're going to be developing a tool for applicants to use to determine if they meet that first criteria of where they've resided. So our question to the work group is just, does this language also work for Denver? We know there will be different components of our program, but as far as the person who would qualify as a social equity applicant, we want your feedback on whether this same language you think works for Denver.
So right off the box, I think that we ought to align with the state and that Denver ought to opt in. Make it real clear, real simple.
Okay, anybody else have any thoughts?
I agree with Mr. Bailey. This is Sarah Woodson with the Color of Cannabis. Denver should opt into the existing state language.
Okay.
This is Jackie Flug from Drizzly. We've previously supported the use of the state language uniformly as well.
Larissa Creek
Great.
on NCIA, I'm as well in support of the adoption. Molly?
Great, thanks, Clarissa.
This is Truman from Marijuana Industry Group. We are too. The state put a lot of time and effort into this, and I think it'd be hard to find something better, to be honest.
Great. All right. Well, it seems to be we all kind of agree in that direction. Were you going to say something, Art?
Yeah, I definitely think that the state should consider adopting this. I'm just curious if, from a city municipal perspective, did anything in regards to the 4 bullets that essentially define disproportionate impacted area, did you all have any red flags with that as a jurisdiction? Does something seem difficult to adopt and achieve in that regard?
So that's a good question, and that's why I mentioned that the MED is thinking or going to try to develop a tool, because if that's the case, I mean, one of the things for us as the city is just making sure it's implementable and operational and something that we'd be able to easily adopt. And so if they have a tool that's available for people to use, I think that makes things pretty straightforward and simple for us. And I think one interesting thing to point out is that it's the census tract within any state, not necessarily, within, you didn't have to be in those census tracts in Denver during that time, or even in Colorado during that time, which just made, I think, the analysis of what neighborhoods it is or that you would have to live in to qualify makes that a much, broader, and so not something we can really look at just for Denver. So it works from that perspective in that it's, if the MED has a tool, it makes it very operationalized. Something we can operationalize pretty easily.
And I just want to clarify for people who are watching, who are not panel members, that number 1, has 2 ways to qualify. So it's either that resided in the opportunity zone throughout that time, or that disproportionate impacted area. So I just want people to realize that number 1 there has 2 different ways to qualify.
Yep.
The state
All right.
regulations look good to me too, Molly.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right. Well, if we can move on from that one pretty quickly, that'll leave time for all the other ones to discuss. So on this next one, we're talking now, we kind of jump into the third bucket, but talking about which licenses would be available to social equity applicants. And in this question and the following questions, it kind of would make some assumptions around that middle bucket around developing the services and components of the program. So it kind of makes some, and so what the slide says is in order to support social equity applicants, one proposal is to reserve certain licenses exclusively for social equity applicants. So making that assumption that that is one of the program benefits that a social equity applicant would receive, the question for you all is just which licenses should be reserved. And so we've listed all the ones out there that Denver is able to issue, and with some little asterisks there, making some assumptions that that includes that Denver would opt in to delivery and hospitality. So any thoughts or opinions around which ones should or should not be included as part of the social equity program?
You know, Molly, part of what happens here is that we're always in the weeds with the language, and you'll see the language in the rulemaking. And so I'm wondering if we're saying to us under this proposal which licenses should be reserved. Do we have any feel for which of the licenses, one would be easy to fast track, which of the licenses would have the least resistance, which of the licenses, pro or con, could be the most receptive in a city like Denver? Do we have any information like that that will allow us to give you not only a response, but an informed response?
So you said most receptive, most resistant, and then one other. And really what I would love to hear that from other people. You know, I think there's different opinions as to which ones are more, have more opportunity for a social equity applicant. And so just from an industry perspective or a prospective applicant perspective, I'd love to hear from other work group members around to answer John's question.
Sure, this is Sean Coleman here, 36 Solutions. I have some thoughts. I've always been interested in the economics of this industry, and following that, seems to me that the most opportunity lies where there is not currently an established marketplace. But then you balance that with what are the capital requirements of the underlying license from the state regulatory perspective. Obviously, I think that all licenses should be available. You know, if someone can get the capital wherewithal to operate a business, they shouldn't be excluded because they were able to get capital and wherewithal to operate a business. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think they should all be included some component. But in terms of which ones are the best, I would say hospitality and sales, and hospitality in general is the newest market segment. So therefore, probably has the most opportunity for new market participants. I would caution in terms of reserving licenses that since it's going to be a new market segment, that there needs to be a critical mass of these businesses for any of them to succeed, right? So that you want to have, whether it's a 2-to-1, 3-to-1, whatever it is, that you certainly want to have a certain amount of mainline business operated, make sure that there's enough critical mass of the service, so that way, whether it's residents, tourists, what have you, it's a service that people are expecting and gives those new businesses opportunity to succeed. Certainly in terms of the established business classes, I think that manufacturing and cultivation have probably the most opportunity for new market, and I would say that because of, again, presuming that delivery is allowed in Denver, which I would encourage that to happen, and that hospitality is allowed, which I would encourage to happen. With those two new ways for the consumer to interact with products, it changes the relationship with consumers with products. So it's a more of a direct relationship with the consumer and the manufacturer or the cultivator, as opposed to having the store as a mandatory mediator of that relationship. So I think that there's going to be more opportunity for new market entrants just because of the default of that there's going to be a new focus on those market segments from the consumer base. So those are great opportunities for people to succeed in those areas. The ones where I think are less compelling, I think, is delivery, just because of the inherent infrastructure requires now under state law that requires you to first have a complete other set of licenses before you can go into that opportunity again. Certainly should be included, because if someone can do it, they should be able to, but it's just not as compelling, I think, as the opportunities for new market entrants in the brand new hospitality segment, as well as in the cultivation and manufacturing segments, because there's going to be a new consumer relationship with those products.
It sounds like, in a nutshell, Sean, you have suggested something that, and all of this is very favorable to the industry, but I'd be interested in knowing things that are not favorable to the industry. Not because I am not supporting the industry, but I would like to see where the industry is at relative to these licenses and how these licenses might allow the industry to partner up, because that's what accelerator or mentor or whatever the state law, whatever we call it, suggests. So what is it that you're saying that is different than what we've been already different dealing with in the state, number one?
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify
Hold on. So I'm only saying, what is it that you're suggesting that is different, other than, this one might be better off because it has a less effect on those folks who have been in the industry for a while?
Sure. So thanks for the opportunity to clarify my context, because the frame that I'm putting in was as neutral as one can be when you're talking about things from an economic perspective, particularly a market that does not even exist yet, specifically hospitality. What I'm talking about is from the perspective of just, let's take any industry, right? If you're trying to create a space for new market participants, which a equity applicant by definition is, you want to find the most opportunity for them to succeed. I would think, so my comments are based on offering the suggestion that the completely new marketplace, which is hospitality, would be a good opportunity to succeed, because there's no established competition to overcome, right? One brand new facility is just as brand new and unfamiliar to the marketplace as the next one. So it's an excellent opportunity for new market entrant to compete, either they're competing against a existing market participant who's entering that space, right? With respect to cultivation and manufacture, I am thinking about these and all of these license classes, both in the context of if someone is operating in an accelerator context, or if they are operating independently and are simply benefiting from the fact that they are a social equity applicant and take advantage of those benefits, right? So in those instances, the reason why I think that a cultivation and a manufacturer are better segments and more compelling segments is, again, because since with the introduction of hospitality, where now a consumer is going to be entertained and buying products that are not being presented by a storefront, and those interesting and back interest, right? As well, sorry, excuse my dog, his parking, sorry about that. And as well as delivery, where the consumer will now be looking at the product from the perspective of the universe of products that are available, as opposed to just the products that happen to be at the shelf that they're in the store that they're in. That these market segments allow that new market entrant, whether they're collaborating with an existing licensee or not, an opportunity to compete in what are effectively new market spaces. That does not mean to suggest that there are not opportunities for these new market entrants to compete in the existing spaces, which is storefronts and things like that, or these other capitals. And so, but again, my interest here is not to favor one segment of the market or not. It's just simply to highlight where I think, from an economic perspective, having followed the industry and its maturation over the years, what are the likely areas where new market participants could succeed because there is space available for the success, as opposed to putting people in a position where it's going to be much more difficult to compete against an established competitor. Again, the analogy I always make is that Chiquita is the word in Spanish for banana, just because that was the company that was there first, and it's kind of hard to overcome that, right? So I think there's just simply less opportunity to compete against large chain stores than there is greater opportunity to compete in the area where there are no hospitality people to compete against, and everyone will be new to the marketplace. Well, I'm sorry, they're going to compete against Sarah Woodson too, but aside from that, it's a relatively new space.
Okay, I'm not sure that's as clear as you think it is, but
I often get that.
Nonetheless,
So I guess
go ahead.
A different way to ask the question, right, would be, should we, of all these licenses that are listed here, should we open them all up to social equity applicants, or prioritize distribution of them to social equity applicants in some way, and let them choose, where they want to find the opportunity? Or should we focus on a subset of license types of where that opportunity lies?
And to answer that very clear question, Molly, what my comment, Justin, is that I think that all of the license classes should be available. I think there should be particular focus on ones where there's more economic opportunity. And I would highlight hospitality and sales, manufacturing, cultivation, but all should be available to those who want to those opportunities.
Right.
That's
Okay.
a little
It
clear.
looks like looks like maybe Sarah and Kenneth maybe had a comment, or maybe.
Yeah, I have a comment. I'll try to keep it short. So when I read the proposal, it's saying to me like what you were saying, as assume that this would happen, right? So it asks what license types should be set aside exclusively for a period of time. And then John said, well, what are the variables that would determine that? So when I go through and I look at this, first, keep in mind there is an accelerator program. So the whole reason for the accelerator program, and then what you see other states do where they have exclusive set-asides, is because industry is needed to work with these people, social equity applicants. I know these people are like these people, social equity applicants, to able to have some success in the marketplace. So we have this accelerator program that now allows for industry to work with someone to create new storefronts. So when you're talking about exclusivity, we know that Denver has not too many options left for stores. And we know that a store has always been considered one of the most coveted types of businesses in cannabis. So stores should absolutely have a set aside for exclusivity, because there's only 10 or maybe 8 left. And then this gives industry an opportunity to move in good faith and show that they actually want to work with social equity people. Because if you're in Denver and you have the capital to get a store, the only way that you can do that is if you work with a social equity applicant. So other cities have done this all the time. The relationships are forced. Sometimes there's predatory practices, but I feel like our industry here, people know each other. Between the work that all of us are doing collectively, there will be a good amount of people to work with. When you look at transporters, including delivery, there's already B2B, but I just want to make this clear that there is now B2C in, I think, 2 jurisdictions, but I believe it's medical only. But when you look at this, right, I think to Sean's point is, B2C is going to be new. How many people are actually going to be out there doing this delivery? If you put an exclusive time period on that, will it then stop existing industry? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But one of the things that we said for the color of cannabis for transporters is that that should be a one-to-one. So therefore there can be set-asides, but it doesn't stop existing industry. And we're still gonna move forward with that. It should be a one-for-one. Cultivation, I think it's the same thing as a store. There's an accelerator program. Industry can show good faith and work with people now and to get them into a cultivation situation. That should be set aside for a time period exclusively. Same thing with manufacturer infused products, which was the original accelerator bill that Sean and Art had came up with that covered cultivation and manufacture. That should be set aside exclusively. Hospitality sales, that should be a one-for-one. It's a new market. We want to make sure that social equity candidates are able to participate, but we don't want to restrict anyone else or the existing market. And then testing facilities and medical research development, while those things are coveted, I don't think it's something that would directly affect a social equity candidate trying to come in now under the accelerator program or under hospitality or transporters. So that is my synopsis on that.
That's helpful, thank you. So I think we had Kenneth, did you have something, Kenneth? And then I think Truman, I saw had his hand raised.
Well, yeah, let me say, this is Ken Allison, and I believe, like the group, all these areas should be open for us to be included. And if you qualify in a certain area and an already established business should make room for those of us who were not included in the first phase, be included now, just so we can get our foot in the door and we can grow as the business grows.
Okay.
That implies two things, Ken.
Yeah.
That implies, one, ownership in a store, but it also implies ancillary types of activity in case a store is not available, yet you want to get in the industry, yet may not be at the dollar value that will allow you to get in at the store level, but may allow you to get in at another level. Am I getting you correct?
Yes, yes.
All right, Truman, I think you were next.
Thanks. The marijuana industry group thinks that anything under the cap right now for the moratorium should go to social equity applicants, so specifically stores and grows. And then we would encourage the city to prioritize social equity applicants across all license types, fast track them and waive the fees, specifically those two things, in order to remove barriers to entry and to expedite the time to market. That's it.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Molly,
and I think we had one.
Can we
Yep, go ahead.
Can we engage, Truman, let's go back a step. I agree with you on making them available, but what is your thought relative to the state not having money, the city not having money, and the industry not suggesting that it is ready to put up any money? How do you, based on these arguments and this intellectual property that we're just sharing here, how do you see us being able to implement these types of programs, proposals, based on the fact that while the industry is supportive, the city nor the state have the resources to, in fact, implement or execute?
John, I'm glad you asked me that. And it's interesting the way you phrased it. So the way you phrased it was that the city doesn't have the money to do it, the state doesn't have the money to do it, and the businesses are not choosing to put up the money. I would actually flip that and say that the city is not choosing to put up the money, the state is not choosing to put up the money, and the industry has put up money already. So I would actually take it the exact opposite way.
Okay,
so hang on. You asked, let me answer it.
Yeah.
I'm going to reserve most of my comments until the slide that deals with funding. Mm-hmm. I think the industry has stepped up in many ways already, and I'll be happy to answer that, when we start talking about the money, because that's what it's going to come down to. But I do think that in terms of helping out folks who get a license, I think the industry has demonstrated a willingness and an ability to do so already, and will continue to do so, not just from an industry perspective, such as the marijuana industry group, but probably the most important ones are kind of person to person, mentor to mentee, business to business. And that's where areas such as, folks like the Color of Cannabis have really stepped up, those types of things. So I could talk for an hour about that question, but I'll leave it right there.
All right, well, I just want to go back. When I said that the state have the dollars, I mean, they're in budget crunches. So it's obvious. And before the situation came down with pandemic, there were questions about whether or not the city or the state would have those dollars available then. But I'm going to reserve further comment because I'd be really interested in seeing where you think y'all have done social equity work of a significant level, because I still think that we're 8 years and $8 billion later, we still haven't done what needs to be done. I'm gonna still be supportive of the industry, but I'm gonna still hold us accountable to the fact that this is not, this is really topical. There's nothing comprehensive about the work that we're doing. And we're spending a whole lot of time on this intellectual piece, and we still don't know, in fact, whether or not we're gonna have the ability to implement this, whether the city does it, the state does it, or the industry joins in and create a hybrid of everybody working together. So hopefully, as this thing unfolds, what you're talking about in terms of examples will become a lot clearer. And I trust that you have, that to show.
So I think that's, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Jackie Fluke has her hand raised.
I'm sorry, who was it?
Jackie Fluke.
Okay, yep, I saw that one. Okay, so yep, and I was just going to say, let's take this one, and then I think we'll move on and we'll get to that funding side here in just a minute. So go ahead, Jackie.
Molly, to your question, Drizzly thinks that all licenses should be open, but we've repeatedly said that we think the delivery, the business to consumer, as Sarah was referring to, is ideal for social equity applicants, in that consumer shopping patterns will change, and it will start out slowly, requiring less capital at the beginning, to the point that John is making of where is the money coming from, that there's less capital required at the beginning, and it can grow and scale as consumer habits change, and that several other jurisdictions have found that this is a very well-suited license for social equity applicants.
Great, thank you. And I think Ashley wanted to just chime in real quick.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Molly. I guess one other question, I mean, I just heard a lot of conversation during this, but what if we put the question another way? Why shouldn't all of these licenses be reserved for social equity applicants?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, Molly. I think all of them should be reserved, but the question is for how long, depending on what type of licenses, right? So, marijuana infused products, cultivation, and hospitality, I think should be reserved, as well as transporter should be reserved as long as possible.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on with medical marijuana and delivery. I wouldn't want to hold up delivery of medical marijuana at all. I don't know if that's a separate issue or what. So the delivery issue of medical marijuana is a little strange when it comes to, I wouldn't want to hold that up. But yeah, for MIPS, cultivation, and transporter, I think they should be reserved the longest. Now, testing and research is something that you might not want to hold for too long. But, I think the goal should be to reserve all of them and then figure out the length based on the license type.
Anybody else want to, and then, because I think you gave us a great opportunity to move to the next slide around how long for each license. So I'll go ahead and go through that one, and then, people can continue to chime in response to Ashley's question too. But under the same assumption, that we reserve certain licenses or prioritize certain licenses for social equity applicants, what is the right timeline to ensure the success of those social equity applicants? So on the side, we kind of gave a range of options with some different considerations under each option. So in the 2 to 3 year range, and I think Art, you're right. We could talk about these for each, we could have this question up here 8 times for each individual license type, but let's try to, narrow in on something. But for the first one, for 2 to 3 years, most marijuana licenses, we can get them issued from time of application to time of issuance. The average is about a year. Additional time could give businesses beyond that 1 year, could give businesses time to become fully operational before opening up additional licenses. And then just for, your information, Massachusetts reserves all delivery and hospitality licenses for 2 years from the date of first issuance, and they're about to go to a vote of their commission to extend the exclusivity for just delivery to 3 years, moving that up from 2 years. The cap for 4 to 5 years, the cap on new store and cultivation licenses has been in place since 2016. It was a significant barrier to entry for equity applicants, and so reserving those licenses for equity applicants for 4 years would match that time frame that was where they were effectively excluded before. And another comparable one would be LA, which just recently extended their exclusivity period for retail and delivery licenses until 2025, making it about a total of 5 years. And then looking at 6 or more years. Retail sales began in 2014. Early adopters had 6+ years to establish their business and themselves in the industry. And so would it make sense to give social equity applicants that same length of time to establish their business? So I'll open that up for discussion as far as where in that spectrum we think a good number lies. And you're welcome to speak to a specific license type or in general.
Molly, Art's point is definitely well taken. But I think that what behooves us here is that we have to step outside of this box for a moment. When you look at the 2 to 3 year, the 4 to 5 year, you look at the second bullet, Massachusetts and LA. Most of those cities are cities that have a predominance of people of color. Most of those states have a predominance of people of color. So in Denver, that situation may be a little bit different, number one. And so the people who sit on the commissions or the people who sit on in position to be able to make those recommendations and suggestions are in many cases people that look like Art and myself. In addition, so that's one. The second part of the scenario is, and I'm going to beat this horse throughout this meeting. We're spending time talking as though once we get through all of this, there's going to be the resources there to be able to implement this. And so we're giving our best intellectual property towards something that the assumption is that will happen. Yet I still haven't heard anywhere in this conversation or prior conversations where folks have an idea of where the resources will come from to be able to do 2 to 3 years, 4 to 5 years, or 6 years. If you don't have the money, it won't make a difference how long the statute is or how long the ordinance is or how long the legislation is. So the question in my mind is, if you give a person 2 to 3 years, then what are you giving that person in support of that, in addition to time, that will allow them within that time to be able to move in a pathway towards success that they feel like they can actually survive in the industry. And if that's not there, then why are we continually having this conversation as though once it's all over, it's going to be okay because the will and everybody's going to step forward to do the right thing when history says that's not the case?
Well, Coach, I think it's good to remember that the social equity applicant needs to own 51% of the business. So, I think if we reserve these licenses, I think we increase the chance that these social equity applicants will be able to raise a certain amount of capital. Let's also remember that the accelerators who will be in the cultivation, the manufacture infused products, as well as the retail space, will also have quite a bit of capital taken off their plate within that accelerator space. I think if it wasn't for COVID, we would have had a good chance of creating a revenue stream from the marijuana tax cash fund to support at least legal fees, as well as licensing fees, and maybe provide some type of bucket for social equity applicants.
Let me push you back there, Art.
All right.
When we know that it was in the last 2 weeks of the close of legislative session before this bill passed. So this means this bill had languished for the entire legislative session. And then all of a sudden, within the last 2 weeks, with the work that you and Sean and Sarah and Cindy Sovine and James and Jonathan Singer, all you folks came together to sort of make sure that it happens. But it was all under the assumption that there was going to be a base or a platform from which folks who were social equity applicants or folks who identified as social equity applicants had a position or a place to spring from. I don't see that here, Art.
Okay, may I comment? So just to answer John's question, and we do have to have a real conversation about money. So first of all, we're speaking as if that we can't get a bill passed to get money next year. We absolutely can, if that's what we desire and if that's what we work on doing. We know that there's money. It's just about whether or not if the city and the state is going to make sure that they put their mouth where their money is and support this. And that could be small amounts first and larger as we roll through. But when you bring up COVID and people are using COVID and COVID and COVID, the people that are most negatively impacted economically by COVID are people of color. So therefore, if we're talking about economic recovery and there's a new opportunity to do something 10 years down the line, the city and the state has a responsibility to make sure that funds can be put into this. And that's just the bottom line. Now, can industry absolutely support this through a voluntary type fund? Yes. When we were running the social equity bill, we sent out a survey and we asked industry, would they be willing to, put some money up to help? Many of them, actually everybody that had the survey said yes, but they wanted to know what would the amount be? How would that look? How would that work? So yes, with the accelerator and with industry helping, we can have some new people enter the market, but we need to make it very clear to the city and the state that if you're going to roll out programs and you're talking about economic recovery and you're talking about COVID, then you need to make money available. And, we have went through the budget very, very fine-tooth. We fine-toothed that whole budget. We went through it. We sent those recommendations to Denver, and I can circulate them to you guys. There is money available for this program. So I think it's
where's it at, Sarah? Where's the money at? Where's the money at?
Yes. So I can send it to you now. I don't know if we want to have that discussion, but there is money. You can reroute money from police budgets. You can reroute money from different places, including the marijuana tax cash fund, to make this program work. So I think it's just important that we come from a space of this is what we want, as opposed to a space of, well, where's the money? There's no money. The city and state can't do it because of COVID. I feel like that's something that we just need to crush immediately and start talking about what does the social equity funding bill look like for next year? Because strategically it was get the definitions in place this year, next year start working on funding. That's my
hold on, John, we've got a couple.
Okay.
We've got a couple people in queue, so let me get to them real quickly. And let me just, what was I gonna say? So I agree with Sarah, right? We know that these two are contingent upon each other. We know we can't provide exclusivity to licenses without having some type of funding. And I don't think it's a one solution answer. It's got to be, a multi-pronged approach. And the city definitely wants to participate in that approach. And so as we focus on this question around what is the right time period, the next question is going to be around funding and what are some options around funding where we can support these social equity applicants and make them as successful as possible, and what are some of those different opportunities and different approaches. But let me get to some people that we haven't quite heard from yet. And I don't know the order, I'm sorry, of who raised their hands first, but I see Dan Pabone, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Sitabaca.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna even try to go on Zoom here, but so one option might be to think about it less in terms of length of time and maybe more about revenue metrics, either revenues generated and or revenues dedicated to the social equity applicants, such that you're not, time can be so arbitrary, but if you can demonstrate either the viability of the business, after a time certain, to say if you hit after 6 months of operation, you hit, $100,000 in revenue, or, and if no one meets that trigger, then you turn on the other spigot to allow other applicants to apply, or vice versa. If we're talking about the revenues to support the social equity applicants, you could say, by this date, either the state or the city must reach this amount in funding in order to turn on the social equity applicant funding and keep the license open. What that does is give transparency to the policymakers of a monetary trigger that has to be met in order to keep it on. So they have to, there has to be a visual and a metric there that everyone recognizes, that stares at everyone in the face to know, we got to hit this, or the spigot turns on or off depending on, what the default position is.
All right. And then Councilwoman?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that, the 6 years plus makes sense for two reasons. One, the reason listed, that, we have over 900 licenses that have basically been utilized by predominantly white people. And so to give people of color or social equity applicants the same amount of time to access licenses exclusively without outside competition makes perfect sense, just for an equity for an equity approach. But it also makes sense because of what everybody else just mentioned. There isn't any money. I'm literally right now combing through the budget of the things that are having to be cut and things that we're proposing to move around. The city is not going to recover within the next couple of years. It's going to take a couple of years. And so in order to accommodate that bounce back time, I think the 6 years makes perfect sense. And I would advocate for us giving the 6 years minimum.
All right, thank you for your comments. And then I think I see Truman had his hand raised, and then if John, you want to chime back in, we can go back to you after Truman.
So I don't have an opinion on the number of years. I think what's most important is a review process. We've seen in other states like Illinois, some kind of perversion of the social equity program, large MSOs coming in, standing up some sort of puppet, and then either buying them out quickly or, just kind of having their way with the program. And so, I'm confident that everybody here at the table can try to help make sure that that doesn't happen. But I think putting in some sort of a review to make sure that the program is accomplishing the goals that the city has would be important. That's all.
Okay. John, did you want, or anybody else, if you want to raise your hand or just jump in?
Just here. You know, I'm sort of where Truman is at in terms, as well as the councilwoman in terms of the years. I mean, if we're going to do it, 6 years is okay, but I really don't have a feel one way or the other. But I do have a feel for how are we letting people know, going back 2 or 3 slides about the different availability of licenses. How are we letting people know the number of licenses in each of those areas that are available? And then how are we letting them know how they can engage in that particular area if in fact they're interested or have the wherewithal to get involved?
I mean, I think, yep, go ahead.
No, you can answer that question first and then I'll.
Oh, I mean, I was just going to say all of this is going to be a big thing for years to come, right? Like we've got to have marketing and communications and technical assistance, and this is not just a single program component. So go ahead, Art.
I see that. Well, I see that. And that's why I continue to raise the dollar question, you know what I mean? Because, you know, a couple of seconds ago I raised it, and, you know, Sarah's point was we need to try to figure it out. Yeah, we need to try to figure it out. But as a business person, you know, you start with a budget. You start with a clear vision. You begin with the end in mind. You know where you want to go. And if you're political, you work backwards so you can see it happen. So I don't see the budget. Councilwoman Sita Baca just said she went through and she's going through the budget. There's no money there. So we have to be authentic with ourselves as we go through this process. And I, for one, won't play the game of playing the game just because we're playing the game. I'm going to acknowledge the fact that we're playing the game. Let's say that that's what we're doing, but let's also be fair that we need to move this thing down the road, but we need to have much closer scrutiny than it appears that we're having right now. And that's not to negate anybody. It's just to say that I'm not naive.
Look, I agree that we need to stay on the city's hat. We need to stay on the state's hat when it comes to finding a revenue stream. That's paramount. I won't disagree with that. But when you look at the state definition of social equity applicant, it's not overly restrictive. I mean, we're going to have a lot of professionals come in under that definition, and I don't think we should look at this from a defeatist attitude, saying that, well, if the state doesn't provide the money, or if the industry doesn't provide the money, that these people who qualify as applicants don't have the ability to raise the money and do it themselves. So I agree we need to stay on folk hat.
We have to show them. Art, we have to show them.
What?
We have to show them. I'm just saying that we have to show them. We have to have those pieces in place, and we need to show them where those resources are. We can't wait for them to get in, and then all of a sudden they'll start trying to figure out which way is up. We need to have those things in place.
But I think you're assuming that we're dealing with a pool of people who don't have the ability to know they're going to have to come to the table with a plan and with some resources. The people who I'm thinking and the people who I've worked for to provide this license opportunity are people with the ability to come up with a business plan and to come up with enough capital to get them started. I understand we need to be able to help as much as possible, but let's not put off the license opportunity for the fact that the money issue is still forthcoming.
Not saying that. I'm not saying that, Art, because I'm gonna be supportive of that. All I'm saying is that I'm hoping that because we went through this in a quick turnaround at the end of session, I'm hoping that because we need to come up quickly with something for state rules, or we need to come up with something quick for city ordinance, that we just rush through it and don't realize the fact that, okay, we're rushing through it, but we need to stay on top of this and consistently have this continuing critical conversation, because folks are talking about next year and down the road and a year after that. Yeah, I'm for all of that, but there's some things that we can do right now, and I want to make sure we clarify all of that as we go through this process right now.
So I think that brings us to a good time to move to the next slide. And again, we can move back and forth between these. So on the next slide, we're talking about funding, and we're talking about not just funding, but how we can ensure the success of these social equity applicants. We have seen with other programs across the country that if that funding piece and that financial support piece isn't a part of the program, then there's not as high chances of success or as likelihood that as all the applicants will have as much success as we would like to see with our program. So as I said, I think this is a multi-pronged approach. It's not just one path that we want to walk down, but several. So we came up with some ideas that we're just throwing out there for discussion, open to other ideas. We're open to fleshing out any of these ideas. One pathway could be through industry partnerships, as has been mentioned today. Some ideas that have been discussed there are regulations that would support transporter licenses. So if transporter licenses were available to social equity applicants, are there regulations that would require those existing stores to establish partnerships with those transporters to conduct delivery? We've talked about social impact plans or community engagement plans and how those can be utilized to create some accountability and transparency within the industry, workshops and other types of technical assistance or mentorship. So those are kind of our ideas for under industry partnerships. A city grant program. It is hard to find money in the city right now. And so, we're thinking through different ideas around creating different new revenue sources in order to be able to create a grant program to provide grants to these social equity applicants. One idea that's been discussed is a surcharge on delivery transactions to create an equity fund that would support these social equity applicants. Grant programs have pros and cons. They have some administrative burdens. They have some legal complications, that type of thing. And then finally, just some kind of random ones in the other ideas. I think Art mentioned something along these lines, but, establishing a longer period of time for exclusivity for these licenses. There's no real financial component to that anybody has to put dollars into. But it gives those social equity applicants a longer time to establish their business. I love the idea, of a state grant program for local jurisdictions. California's done that. Sarah just mentioned, looking at legislation in 2021. And again, we're open to all ideas. The city wants to participate. Just if we say grant program or if we say, surcharge, like the one idea, it doesn't have to mean that we don't pursue another idea. Any additional thoughts on funding or ways to support our social equity applicants?
Hey, Molly, this is Ashley. So is Ian on yet? Because I know we talked about what Art was referring to, the state marijuana cash tax fund. And I know everybody on the call is familiar with that, but that was one thing that I think Ian was going to look into that for us about any appetite at the state to use those dollars, now that are already appropriated elsewhere by legislation, can be legislatively changed for the state to develop like an equity program to fund local, grants for local jurisdictions. So is he here?
I don't see him on here, no.
All right. Molly, would you go back a slide?
Yep.
Just for a moment. It says, you have the 6-year slides here, right? And one of the things that you talk about is giving the equity applicants the same length of time for exclusive access that you gave to the folks who first got into the industry. Now we go back to where we were. Okay. So.
Oh, yeah. Here.
Yeah. So if we're looking at other ideas, has the idea from an industry perspective, Truman, come forward? This is Truman and Molly. Has the idea from those folks who've been in the industry, who've had the advantage for 6 to 8 years, for them putting up something as part of a fund based on the fact that they had the advantage fund, number one. And then two, has there been any conversation relative to the fact that since the higher education is now going into cannabis education, is there any relationship, partnership, or opportunities to work with them in terms of funding. And then lastly, relative to the funding question, at certain of the foundations in town, be it the Denver Foundation or the Trust or, you know, whatever, some of them have accounts for organizations who don't necessarily want to administer the money themselves, but like to have a fiduciary administer the money for them. Have we been looking at any of the foundations that might be interested in, one, holding an account, or two, helping mobilize funds that then could be utilized for cannabis education, cannabis business development, anything along those lines?
Clarissa Creek with NCIA. John, I'm happy to just answer your question on behalf of the National Cannabis Industry Association. We have awarded in the last 2 months 100 free memberships or complimentary memberships to social equity applicants and licensee holders. This amounts around $250,000. We're not stopping anywhere, but we certainly are vetting these and making sure that they are licensee applicants, and there's no, like Truman was saying, sort of a hidden motive by other investors. So that's something we're doing. And we also have started an opportunity fund, which we call the Opportunity Fund, where we're fundraising to go strictly to programs like this nationwide.
And Truman, it looks like you had your hand up.
Yes. Okay. So here's my response on what the industry has done. Last year, the city of Denver collected $32 million from cannabis licensees in fees, excise taxes, etc. Okay. Of that, $9 million went to capital improvements and $2.5 million went to the police budget. I would suggest taking a small portion of that $2.5 million that went from the police budget and starting a fund with that. The marijuana cash fund at the state level collects, between $200 and $300 million a year. I think that's really where the bulk of the money is. And it would be relatively easy to portion out some of that. For example, cannabis licensees incurred various fines at the state level last year that totaled up about $1 million. And I'm happy to send the sources out to everybody. These are real numbers. That's not money that the state is counting on. That just goes into the general state fund. It would be easy to carve out a portion of those as well and get this program off the ground right there. Another thing that was built into the delivery bill was $1 at the state level for each delivery that goes to law enforcement, whatever that is. I actually think it would be a very nice gesture at the state level to, given everything that's gone on this summer and every year, to allocate that to a social equity fund, either at the state level or distribute it on down to the local level where it can be distributed and kind of put where the dollars are. Those are some real tangible things that could be done in partnership with the state to put some real dollars behind this program.
Okay, so I asked a question, but that's a suggestion and a recommendation by you of what the state could do and the city could do with their budget. My question to you, though, was what is the industry doing other than saying let's partner? What is the industry doing to deal with some of the issues that I've raised relative to that fund? I mean, you're saying take the $200 or $300 million from there. Is that industry-controlled dollars or is that state-controlled dollars? I'm talking about industry-controlled dollars because y'all have had 6 years, 8 years, you've had a leg up. So from an industry perspective, where is the work being done from a social equity perspective, industry-wise, that you recommend, not the state dollars or the city dollars, but from the industry dollars?
John, those excise taxes, those are from the licensees.
Yeah, but once they leave you, they're state dollars. We're talking about not the fact that you give your taxes to the state. I'm talking about once the state dollars are gone, what is the industry now doing, again, relative to social equity? Because this industry, in fact, are the ones who were able to get the $8 billion head start. So what does the $8 billion head start mean relative to looking at what the industry should be doing and not what the industry has done relative to getting taxes to the state, and now what the state should do, and then the industry claim credit for it because it's the industry's taxes.
Well, we
So I'd
we have
like
a very
to build
different.
off of that.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll follow you, Molly. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I'd like to just build off of that because we know like new dollars are just hard to come by right now. And so what other types of ways can the industry and other, not just the industry, but what other ways can we support social equity applicants? And so we talked about extending the length of exclusivity for social equity applicants. There's the idea on there around building partnerships with transporter licensees where they would have exclusive access to transporter licenses, and then having the existing industry utilize those transporter licenses and build partnerships with those businesses.
Yeah, I think I can answer both questions here, or at least take a crack at it. I think the partnerships with existing businesses is key. That's something that we are uniquely set up to do, and we are ready and already doing. So in addition to, discounting memberships and trade associations, that's happening at both the state and local level. There are job fairs that are happening. There are trainings happening. We did a training about 6 weeks ago for all of our members on creating cannabis-specific D&I policies, not just about hiring within our own organizations, but extending that out to our suppliers, asking them for their D&I policies, making sure that they're spending their dollars on minority-owned businesses. We also are ready to do one-on-one mentorships. I've literally made million-dollar mistakes in this business. No need for people of color to make those same mistakes, especially when dollars are hard. In terms of putting a dollar value on that, I don't know how to do it, but it's easy to look at potential licensees and see where they could go wrong. I mean, some of these businesses are going to be like little baby sea turtles. Some of them are going to make it and some of them aren't. And if they've got a company or a person who can help them along the way and steer them to the right course, more of them are going to make it to the ocean and become big turtles.
Any other industry associated work group members that want to chime in there? Maybe Jessica Scardina. I don't know, Jackie, if you have thoughts there, but just interested to hear from you all on that proposal or idea.
I'll let Jessica go first if she'd like.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Go ahead, Jackie. I'm contemplating.
There's a lot, so Molly, I want to be sure that I'm addressing the right question. I mean, the funding and where the funding and the industry can support that. I mean,
I think what I was focusing on was those partnerships with the existing industry with transporter licenses. And if that's one way that we can support the success of new social equity applicants that have a transporter license.
Yes, we have already submitted the comments that we thought the requiring the relationship was a way to ensure their success. It's been done in Massachusetts, and we've supported that model as well.
Okay. Jessica, anything to add, or anybody else? Feel free to chime in.
No, not right now, thanks.
Okay.
Ali, I'm thinking about private-public partnerships. So, my goal with the accelerator program is really about bringing in private dollars to assist. And I don't know if that's just because I'm a little cynical on the budget discussions, and maybe cynical on the industry as well. But we're able to bring in outside private dollars. So however the city can help me maybe pitch these people, or maybe match to a certain extent what we're able to bring in privately, that's something else you can throw in the mix.
Yep, that's a path we're pursuing as well. So thank you for mentioning that. To go back to one more topic quickly on the funding question, a couple people have brought up the $1 surcharge that was added into deliveries at the state, looking for new revenue sources that can help the city provide some funding as well. And again, sorry, Jackie, I'll pick on you, but I don't know if you have any insight from Massachusetts where fees are higher and if that changes demand or how that impacts delivery services or delivery demand.
I can give the alcohol analogy more than the cannabis analogy simply because Massachusetts right now, it's the medical only, the recreational is about to start. From what we have seen on the alcohol front, that a service charge has not dissuaded consumers from making their purchases for delivery. It's only something that we on the alcohol side have started in recent months, but we haven't seen that it slows the conversion, the consumer actually making the purchase.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we've got about, a little less than 45, or a little more than 45 minutes left, so I'm going to move on to the next question. And this is the last one before we move on to some specific questions around delivery and hospitality. But this one's around the cap and the lottery. So as everybody or most people know, we've had a cap that was set in 2016. Prior to that, we had a transition phase for anybody that had a previously existing medical license could add or convert their medical license or add a retail license. And so, you know, an unintended consequence of that could have been just increased barriers to entry. And then lottery processes, as we've explained in previous meetings, can often result in litigation that slows down the process, which goes against the goal of supporting our social equity applicants. So if licenses are available only to social equity applicants for a period of time, like we've kind of assumed in some of the previous slides, any recommendations for how the cap or lottery should be addressed? Again, throwing out a couple of options just for the purpose of discussion, but one option would be to maintain the cap, but then hold the lottery only if the applications exceed the number of locations available. And then look at what the lottery requirements are and see if there's ways that we can reduce or minimize the requirements. A question was asked to me once this information was sent out was around what are those number of available locations? And that number will always change right up until we hold the lottery. We would be then required to announce the number of available locations, but I think it's also an important question for you all to know some type of answer so that you can, you know, be informed in this question. So right now, there is somewhere under a dozen or so locations that would be available for a store. And again, that could totally change before a lottery was held. And then the grow locations would be somewhere between 20 to 30. Between now and then, licenses could be surrendered or revoked and more locations could become available. But just wanted you all to know where we sit just for you to be able to make an informed answer about that. A second option would be to remove the cap on store and cultivation locations and not have a lottery and do what we were talking about before, which is identifying a time period where licenses would only be available to social equity applicants. Under this option, we'd probably propose that we maintain the provision that prohibits transfer of location where co-located businesses would be able to split up. So right now, if you have a retail and a medical license at one location for a store or a grow, those have to move together so that you don't create new locations. We'd probably recommend that be maintained. And then same thing under the lottery right now, there's a provision that prohibits new locations in the top 5 saturated neighborhoods. And so we recommend that provision be maintained even if there was no cap in lottery. And again, these are just what we came up with, were some ideas for discussion, but I would love to hear from you all.
So what's happening in other states, Molly, just for our conversation? And I think, you know, I usually don't ask a question that I don't already know the answer to, but I posed this because, you know, let's take Michigan, for example. 75 new social equity licenses, but they all have to go through a lottery. And the benefit there is that they're all social equity licenses, but they still have to go through a lottery, being redundant, yet there's a reason for the redundancy. And so what is our thinking when you look at something like that in terms of the fact that not everybody's going to get a license? And some other states, I mentioned Oregon, where they have taken revoked licenses and gave them up as social equity, and there's no lottery involved. So give us, the pros and cons of the lottery, and maybe the pros and cons of option A and option B.
Well, I think there's a lot, and I think I'll keep, I'd love to hear from everybody else what they see as the pros and cons, but I think two of them are listed there as far as the unintended consequences that a lottery and a cap can have on a social equity program, and then same thing with the potential litigation that a lottery can create. But I'd love to hear from other people around that.
I would love to speak in support of option A, maintaining the cap, because if we're talking about equity, there are multiple sides of equity to the industry. And the fact that we have over 200 grow licenses in one neighborhood that doesn't even have a grocery store and is still majority minority, that is not equitable. And so I think that the caps protect neighborhoods from that kind of continued saturation. And so I would go with option A for that reason.
So just wanted to point out too, because I think that's a great point and one that we thought about, that under option B, that provision around no new locations in saturated neighborhoods would be maintained.
I like that, but there's also no caps on neighborhoods that are pretty close to saturation. And I don't want to see us get to saturation levels, period.
Okay. All right, it looks like Sarah Belstock has a comment.
Yeah, I would just like to echo what the councilwoman said. I would caution us just to think about issues related to density and saturation, particularly the impact that those have on equity and health equity within those neighborhoods for youth and for all the people that live there.
Okay.
Molly, I see there's a cap on cultivation. Does that include marijuana infused products?
No, there's no cap right now on manufacturing.
Okay, and are you trying to prevent manufacturing in certain saturated neighborhoods as well? Because I'm thinking about like co-op kitchens and so forth. I still think this is where primarily the opportunity lies.
I think that's a good point, and I think there are different types of MIP facilities that pose a danger. Mm-hmm. There was some concern early on with, I think it was the butane involved in the extraction process. Is that right, Molly? Is it butane that was involved in that?
Yeah, they can use different types of solvents, and a lot of where MIPs can operate as a result of those operational safety hazards, if you want to call them that, that's kind of handled through zoning. And so a lot of the bigger MIP facilities, especially if they're using solvents and things like that, they have to go into more districts that allow for more heavy manufacturing.
And that is an equity concern, because people of color are typically still feeling the impacts of redlining and live in those more heavily industrial areas and light industrial areas. But I do think that the co-op kitchens are awesome. That's a great idea, as long as there's not that heavy or chemical extraction process that's like living next to a meth house.
Yeah, that helps. I don't expect many of the folks who I know are chomping at the bit to get into a co-op kitchen or into the infused product space are on that butane tip. But yes, definitely something that I'll keep an eye on and spread the word about.
Molly, can I just ask a question about the concern about saturation and caps? I don't think that caps are the only solution to the issue of saturation. There are plenty of regulatory systems that are concerned about saturation and therefore limit every application to an individual analysis at that time rather than simply placing a cap on it, which the caps in the future, when you go down the line, really just wind up to a system where people are selling licenses and a system that's not equitable. So I just hear people they're concerned about saturation, and I don't think that caps are the only solution that's out there to that issue.
I think that the caps are the solution to currently saturated or close to saturated areas. There's another layer of this that's a zoning solution to open up the potential for facilities throughout the city versus concentrating them in only a couple of areas, which is why we have the saturation.
What are those zoning solutions you think, Councilwoman?
Well, right now, the facilities for grows are zoned to only be in Black and brown neighborhoods. And so I think that if you opened up zoning to allow the facilities in any commercial area, any area zoned commercial, then that would be much more equitable, because you could turn an old Kmart somewhere else in the city into something versus fighting over the few parcels that are left here in our industrial Black, brown areas where they're the only places that are zoned for them.
Is that your interpretation, Molly or Ashley?
Which piece?
What the councilman just shared.
Is zoning a barrier to equity?
Is zoning a barrier to equity? That's a difficult question. I mean, all regulations are barriers, right?
I think the better question is, where are we allowed to have dispensaries and grows? Are we limited in where they can be placed?
Yeah. So as
For
you guys
zoning?
know, we've talked about that before. I mean, zoning is not what our business licensing department does. That's community planning and development. And then I know council takes the lead on that. And all I know about how CPD decided what type of zoning would be allowed for what type of use was they looked at marijuana uses and compared it to the most similar use. And they looked at marijuana cultivation similar to all other cultivation and horticulture and where you can grow tomatoes in the city. And so that was the analysis they went through. But, you know, if you want to circle back with zoning on that, that's just not something in mine and Molly and excise and licenses expertise or authority.
I don't think that the question is whether or not you can do it. The question is that a barrier right now to equity?
And if y'all don't know the answer, can we get the answer? Because I think that it's a significant question relative to the caps and the concentration in a particular area, and the area that is in a close proximity relative to caps and concentration.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what Councilwoman Sita said too, that the equity can come in different ways. And so are we talking about the people that live in those neighborhoods, or are we talking about, is it a barrier to equity for social equity applicants or people that are trying to get a license? And so I guess it's a multifaceted question.
And I can assure you, John, we can talk to other people, but I can assure you, John, that zoning is a huge barrier to both the people who live in the saturated neighborhoods and the future social equity applicants, because since there's only the zoning for grows is in the inverted L. It's along the industrial areas in the inverted L, which is where we know we've concentrated people of color. And that's why the caps matter in those situations. But when we open up the new licenses, people will be fighting for locations that are in capped areas or close to being capped. And so that's why we need to be able to do this all over the city instead of just concentrating it in Black and brown communities.
Which then leads to, Molly, which then leads to a question, just a historical question for either you or Ash. Do we know, based on what the councilwoman just said, why there was a concentration in Black and brown areas? Because I think it's odd, Black and brown were not allowed to be in the industry, yet we concentrate the industry in Black and brown areas. Was there any reason why, from your perspective or anybody's perspective on this call, why we ended up with that type of concentration in areas of people of color?
I mean, from what we learned at that time, number one, it was zoning, right, and location. What we've also heard from marijuana applicants that when they were first applying and first opening up, they had a hard time going into new commercial type areas, new commercial type properties, because they might still have a federal loan on that building. So they went into older warehouses that had already been paid off by the owner. We learned that there were a lot of landlords that just didn't want to rent to cannabis businesses. We learned that those landlords had tenants that didn't want to rent to cannabis businesses. Molly, do you remember some of the other reasons?
Well, I mean, if that's the case, could there also have been racial reasons why people didn't want those? I mean, I may be stepping out the box, but could there have been racial reasons that people didn't want that industry in their particular area? And Councilor Cedar-Baca's comment about let's do it citywide, will we run into the same type of resistance now that we ran into prior, based on folks may not wanting cannabis industry in their particular neighborhood, or in this case, in their councilmatic district?
I think,
maybe Sarah can address that, but we do still hear that there are landlords who do not want to rent to cannabis businesses because of the stigma around cannabis.
And also, there's a legitimate economic issue here too. Whether you're talking about going back to the beginning of cannabis regulation in Denver, 2010, or you're talking about now, which is that it is the case that if a property is mortgaged in any way, that property would be at risk, that the bank would call a mortgage on that property, right? So in general, we find landlords who are interested in renting to cannabis businesses are people who either own the building outright or they sell the building to the cannabis business. So that is just an economic reality that has to deal with the banking system. And I don't think that we're going to be able to solve that on this call, because that's just the economic reality dealing with the banking system.
Clarissa Craig with NCIA. I would agree with Sean that this was most likely an economic choice by the industry more than anything based on race, John, in my assessment. With that said, I would advocate for option B, just as a point here. The reason being because we have not seen nationwide that caps at all are incentive to social equity in any one place. We have not seen that be the case, as well as sort of just any sort of restrictions. The same thing with the lottery. There were a lot of issues in Illinois and people are not happy at all with how that was conducted. So I would not support personally a lottery process. In fact, we probably want to just create systems where licensing can be obtained at the city and county level. These regulations just being determined by local jurisdictions, I mean, meeting state requirements. I mean, we just can I think, create something that really truly reflects the outcomes we want to achieve here. But I would refer to Sarah too, if she has any comments here.
So it looks like Jessica. It looks like Jessica has her hand raised, and both you guys referenced Sarah. Were you talking about Sarah Woodson or Sarah Belstock? We'll go ahead and let Jessica chime in, and then if either Sarahs want to chime in, feel free.
Thanks, Molly. Hey, I just wanted to add really quickly on the zoning piece. So cultivations can only be located in industrial zones, so IA, IB, and then open space zones. I'm looking at the Denver zoning map, and it looks like Councilwoman Sitabaka was referring to, it's along the inverted L in northern Denver and along the Santa Fe corridor. There might be some open space areas where people could go, but I haven't seen anyone apply in those, at least not yet. Stores can go anywhere where retail sales are permitted, but what happens there is people are subject to really restrictive setbacks from schools, from daycares, from alcohol treatment centers. And so what happens is they get pushed out of commercial or residential type areas and all get pushed up into the industrial zones where there aren't those types of facilities. So I think this creates a huge barrier to entry for social equity applicants. If we're noting that these are Black and brown neighborhoods that have, consistently been saturated, we should open up the areas in central Denver, maybe eliminate some of the setbacks and make more places where these stores and grows can go, and look at revising the zoning as well. With respect to the different options on the table, I would probably go with option B of removing the cap, not instituting a lottery, and then maintaining the prohibition on saturated neighborhood locations. That still accomplishes that goal without creating a fight over licenses, which results in really high purchase prices, really expensive leases, because those are big barriers to entry for social equity applicants too.
I will just remind everybody that you're going to pit Black and brown communities against Black and brown communities if you go with removing the caps on the saturated and close to saturated neighborhoods. You will have Black and brown communities fighting to maintain the caps, even though it's for social equity applicants, because of how excessive it is. And so I think that we need to fight that other fight with zoning, because it's not okay that only certain neighborhoods are zoned for it. Whether or not there's an economic choice that's involved, zoning does not allow a choice. Zoning mandates that they're in certain areas. So it's not just an economic choice by the industry, it's the way that the city set it up so that it wasn't in the backyards of certain people and was instead in the front yards of others.
All right, so I don't see any hands raised right now. Any final thoughts on this topic?
I think that all these options are going to be based on what happens with the previous slide, because all of this stuff is really going, what's going to be best for the social equity candidate is going to be based on whether or not there is an exclusivity period and how long that is. But, when I look at it, I would have to agree, maintain the caps on stores and cultivations. I do not think there needs to be a lottery. So if we could fill out the other option box, maintain the caps, no lottery. And then one thing that we've been kind of going back and forth is with saturation. I think that the maintain provision prohibiting locations in top 5 saturated neighborhoods, that number should be moved down to the top 3. And then there was the lady that just spoke before, there needs to be some changes to setbacks. And then of course, no matter how many times we go around it, zoning is a barrier to social equity applicants, and zoning needs to change too. So I would put some stuff in this other option. But again, all of this stuff is going to be contingent upon whether or not if there's an exclusivity period and how long that is.
Molly, based on what the councilwoman has raised, based on what certain folks have said relative to zoning, and the fact that whatever ordinance or suggested ordinance proposal goes to the mayor and then the council, if we're getting an indication now that the councilwoman has some concern about the zoning piece, I think it would behoove us to do some research or something in that area, so that once it gets back to her, she at least feels like we heard her relative to the zoning issue as it relates to a barrier for social equity applicants. If not, knowing her, she'll raise the same issue again and may not be as receptive as she appears to be on the call today.
Well, I think
we can definitely do.
If we're gonna tackle zoning with the councilwoman, that's something we can definitely do. We then have to start having those conversations with her, get her the information that she needs so she can provide some type of proposal to bring to city council to change zoning. So if we want to do that,
actually, it's a little bit bigger than that. So I think Sarah's proposal of a third option makes sense. Maintaining the caps and not holding a lottery makes sense for a third option. But I think that that you all, excise and licensing, needs to make a recommendation to CPD as a part of the equity package to change the zoning, because you're the same entity. You guys are the executive branch of government and should be partnered up on this initiative, knowing how deeply zoning affects equity in this field. And so I would, as a work group here, expect, hope for, demand that excise and licensing makes a strong recommendation and opens the doors to CPD changing the zoning appropriately.
I think, Councilwoman, that's the point that I am raising by suggesting that the work group excise and license and zoning have a discussion based on not only the questions that you've raised, but some of the concerns that others have raised. And if zoning is going to be an issue, let it be an issue now rather than a last minute issue that could then throw a wrench in whatever ordinance we come up with.
I agree on that.
Okay, so I just want to follow up on something that the Councilwoman and Sarah mentioned, which is a third option of holding a cap or having a cap without holding a lottery. I'm not sure how those two go together, because once you get to the cap, like the last couple of licenses that you're issuing before the cap, you know, it's either a rush to the courthouse or, I mean, it's a pretty operationally difficult thing to issue licenses under a cap without a lottery, unless you have some suggestions.
I mean, there's 8 licenses as far as retail stores. Are we talking about cultivation too? Because to me, it's just simple business. First come, first serve. If you get there first, if it's social equity, if it's an exclusive time period for them, if you get there, your date stamped, the applications are processed based on how they're date stamped.
I agree. I think that some people are going to be at different phases of readiness when this goes into effect. And if you're ready, then jump right in. We've already removed a huge slice of the competition. And so that element of reserving a time period for exclusively the social equity applicants, I think opens up the doors enough for people to be able to run in at their own pace without having to do the lottery.
This is Erica. I have a question just based on research we've done in other places and the concerns raised both here and at the state work group about predatory practices for equity applicants. So just want to get your, Sarah and Councilwoman, what are your thoughts on, do you think that would have a negative impact on equity applicants if there is a first come, first serve, or do you see that not being a problem? We just want to open up equity applicants to risk of being preyed upon for their, first come, first serve status. So if you can talk about your thoughts about that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. My thing is something that Art had talked about a little while back, and this is one of the things our organization continues to say with every conversation that we have. Social equity in the cannabis industry is not a handout. It's an opportunity for the Black and brown entrepreneur to enter into the industry. And so we know that social equity candidates have to own 51% of the equity of the business. So we have to have some level of faith here where we believe that people that want to be in the industry and that are entrepreneurs and already have done things in other spaces are able to, work through contracts and negotiate. And so I feel like if we were in a situation where it was California, where, there was first to market, everyone was just trying to get in, then yeah, you can get the person that, just got out of jail and that's your social equity candidate. But we don't have a lot of opportunity left here. So, I wouldn't be too concerned around corporate predatory practices. If a Live Well or, any other big store wanted to open up a new store and a social equity candidate owned 51% of that, that's an absolute win in my personal opinion.
And I think just being on the front end of, or knowing that has happened, we can get out in front of it with messaging when this opens up about being aware of those predatory companies and what it looks like and what it means. And if we're very clear about the process and what people need to do, they'll hopefully understand, when a predator is preying on them. Because we have now the tools and the knowledge to be able to inform them before we even open up the licenses that has happened elsewhere.
If we do the teaching and the education and the informing, that might be true. If we don't, people are going to come into the industry like they have in other states, and they're going to be propped up by other folks to take advantage of the opportunity that's available to them. One, that's just human nature. And whatever we do to prepare for that will be in the best interest of the industry. But also, let's just take a look at the black market. One of the reasons that there may be a decrease in black market spending, even though Colorado hasn't, is because of the number of social equity applicants in other states, or the number of black and brown folks in other states that they're letting into the industry that no longer have to sell illegally. And so I just want to make sure that we give some thought to the fact that this is going to happen. Whether we think it's not going to happen, it's going to happen. And I'm not naive enough to think that while it has happened in other states, it's probably happened here already. Some of us just don't know about it, but it's going to continue to happen unless, as folks have said, we get ahead of it, we educate, because there's a reason that some communities are not involved. And a lot of that has to do with lack of education, ignorance to the fact, or fear. And so there's going to be a need for a whole lot of cross-pollination in terms of preparing folks to take advantage of being able to get into this industry, including technical assistance once they get ready to go. You can be first in line, but you could be first in line just because you heard about it first. You got to be able to be first in line and know what to do with it once you get in line, and then get certified or get approved or get stamped to now go start your business and start to move.
Molly, can I ask
a
question?
Go ahead, Art. Yep.
No, am I right that there's no way the city of Denver could allow their social equity applicants to use residential kitchens for infused product manufacturing? There's no way the city of Denver can allow social equity applicants to use their home grow provision for cultivation and put those products in the market. And there's no way that the city of Denver can allow only social equity applicants to sell products at, say, farmers markets. That all would require state law, right? State changes with the marijuana enforcement.
I would guess the last one, and I don't know if Anshul wants to chime in here, but I would guess the last one. I'm not sure about the first two. I don't know if those are state restrictions or local zoning restrictions.
And I bring this up because to give equity, to expand equity and to give these people opportunities to succeed, I think we need to look at establishing carve-outs in regards to the regulations for equity applicants. And this may not be the call for that, and I'm just, but this is what I'll be bringing up in my meetings with legislators and so on and so forth. But I think that type of creativity is going to be needed. And I'm sorry, I'm not really talking about the cap and lottery. I'm moving.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good question.
Yeah, but
So I think 10, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was done for the most part.
I think Henny had her hand raised and we haven't heard from her yet today. So I'm going to let her chime in and then I'm going to try to move on because we only have about 15 minutes left. So we have to move to public comment.
Yes, thank you very much, Molly. And Councilwoman Citybach and I worked side by side when it was time to talk about saturation in impoverished neighborhoods. And one of the things that we haven't really discussed is what is the impact on the caps related to hospitality licenses that offer sales? Because that is really, in a way, if every single licensee obtained a hospitality sales license, that in essence would double the density in Denver. And the quantities by which can be sold in these hospitality sales areas is quite high, and we know that there is an impact on kids and youth use when it comes to density as well as proximity from the normalization standpoint. And I know that I hope we'll have time to talk a little bit about some of the Healthy Kids Colorado data that has now been released and published to just overlay that conversation as we're all talking through these things.
Yep, I think now is actually a great time to jump to that. And so I just skipped one of the delivery questions, which we can hopefully come back to, but to keep on that topic, one of the first questions to talk about with hospitality and stores is continuing that density and saturation question. And so the links in this slide link to some research that show that density of alcohol outlets is an environmental risk factor for youth alcohol. I know we're talking about a different substance, but just trying to use what research we have available. And then physical availability, there is some research that has shown physical availability of marijuana is related to increased frequency of adult marijuana usage. So trying to see what tools and hear from you any ideas around tools that could be utilized to reduce density and concentration of businesses that allow for sales. So to Henny's point, not just talking about stores and centers which have proximity restrictions we just talked about. There are caps and provisions to limit the number of businesses going in or new businesses going into saturated neighborhoods. I mean, those are the tools that we have in place for stores right now. Should they be applied to hospitality and sales locations? There's proximity restrictions, there's caps. What tools should we deploy to reduce saturation of this new type of business?
So, well, I got comment about that because I think back to my time when I served in the City of Boulder Downtown Management Commission, which deals with the Pearl Street Mall and that environment. And one of the things that we always were concerned about when we were talking about the mix of businesses is the street vitality, right? You want to have a certain amount of you know, in the commercial district, a certain amount of life going on to attract people to come there to participate in and be a part of that community and spend money there, right? And so one of the challenges with hospitality, of course, is that under the state regulations, a hospitality storefront would not be able to contribute to that street vitality because under the state law, that business can't show what its activity is. It can't be presented as anything except identifying its location under the state law. So I think a more important question dealing with this issue is, you know, how do these businesses meld into that street vitality life when they can't contribute to that in the ways that a dress store or a bar even is making its presence known, contributing to that street life, inviting the public into that area. These businesses by definition have to be such that they're not attractive, that they're not drawing that attention. So I think that's going to be an interesting question, how that is addressed, what ways the city can help through allowances or requirements in site design, for example, to make these what would otherwise just be odd gaps in the streetscape more attractive and more part of the communities in which they're serving. So, because I think that's going to be a challenge.
Molly, I'd like to add on that point.
Yep, and after Michelle, we've got Sarah Belstock. So go ahead, Michelle.
Michelle with Denver Public Schools. I think in some ways, I think about the opposite issue in terms of unintentional advertising based on odor. So I actually think in some ways, even though a particular location might not be advertised in terms of signage, you have odor coming into the neighborhood, and you need to think of all of the youth that might be in that neighborhood and what the normalization of the odor does.
The state regulations also require that is addressed as well, through ventilation or for ventilation, obviously for places indoors as well as for outdoors. So that again, those issues have been addressed in the very comprehensive state regulations. And the challenge, I think, from a street vitality perspective, is that there aren't any meaningful ways for the city to opt out of some of those regulations. They sort of impose statewide. So that's just something to consider.
Yeah, we could just not do it, Sean. Just don't opt in. Denver could not opt in to.
Sure, I think that would be negative in terms of Denver's ability to maintain its important role as a thought leader in this important policy change to maintain the vitality of Denver as for all of the, for example, when I think about, from my former role in classical music, classical cannabis, remember that one of the very first things that happened when cannabis legalized was that collaboration with the Colorado Symphony, which of course is the city's tenant, and classical cannabis, and the amount of not just interest locally, but internationally, not just from the cannabis industry, not just from public policy, but people from the arts. It was so important for the arts community to have that experience. It was so early on. So I think we'll see more of those types of what I call that positive normalization, that, that this is something that's consumed like wine by doctors and lawyers and lobbyists as well, right? So who listen to Beethoven, right? So I think that's going to be an important part of this discussion. And that's why it's very important that Denver moves forward with this law, because we need to continue that leadership role.
So I think we've got Sarah Belstock next, and then Truman.
Thanks. This is Sarah Belstock from Denver Health. And I really want to emphasize that I think one of the main mechanisms that we have in our pocket for really reducing any kind of unwanted consequences in terms of increased use among youth or others is to really think carefully about density and to some extent proximity. I realize that the two go hand in hand, but the research on density is very clear. When we look at lessons learned from the tobacco industry, from alcohol outlets, and the initial research that's coming out around marijuana outlet density. It is really, we see as density increases, so does use, and particularly youth use. And so I think this is one of the main tools we have in our pockets to really avoid some of those unintended consequences of kind of opening up our spaces here.
Thank you, Sarah. Truman?
Sorry, I've lowered my hand.
Oh, okay. Then Sarah Woodson, I think you had your hand raised.
I do. I want to talk about density and sale limits with Henny and Sarah. So I think the most obvious example is on a micro sale license, you could sell 2 grams of cannabis flower, which essentially, depending on how much you smoke, is a joint or maybe 2. So can you explain to me how that then transfers into 50% more density for micro sales? So that's my first question. I'm just trying to connect those two things because I don't see the connection at all.
So I think the density research has been done a couple of different ways, and some of it is just looking at pure number of licenses in a specific area. And so, unfortunately, we don't know what that magic number is, right? Like there's no once the density hits this, then we see use increase. So unfortunately, we don't have, the data is not that sophisticated, but the trend is consistent that as density goes up, and again, it's been measured a few different ways, sometimes measured by kind of the number of licenses in a specific area. As those numbers go up, so too does youth use. And again, I wish we had a magic number, right? Like it would be a lot easier. So I just encourage us to think about kind of the impact of increasing density and to think about it carefully and to think about how we continuously monitor the impact of the changes that we're making right now, and are continuously able to respond in a prevention space if and as we need to.
Got it. Okay, and the reason for that is just because, you know, when we discuss hospitality, it does fall under a new license type, which is social equity. And when I went through, and I really went through yesterday and looked at the study that you guys just put out, and how the increase, what was increasing, what was the method of use. And so one thing that we do know is that there's no place to smoke, because unfortunately the way that I-300 rolled out with additional setbacks and restrictions, if you're trying to get a hospitality business in Denver with this I-300, it is a nightmare. It's virtually impossible. And so there's still people all over smoking, and there's no place to smoke for the cannabis consumer or for the tourist. And so I wonder, do you guys have research that shows how smoking outdoors and not having safe spaces affects children and youth?
I have not seen that specific research. And again, I think it's probably from the more kind of roundabout way of understanding like visible use, whether that comes from looking at the use or looking at signage related to it. Impacts kind of that normalization and those positive expectancies, which in turn impact behavior. So I don't know, there's not as much direct research, I don't think, related to what you've just asked about.
Okay.
I can supplement that. Having worked with youth, I think that the availability piece of it works out a little bit different. What I saw kids primarily accessing and using were the treats, all of the infused products, the lollipops, the Rice Krispies, the gummies. They weren't as enticed by the smoke. I think the smoking has been normalized.
Did everybody lose her, or is it just me?
I can't hear her.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Councilwoman, we lost you.
I want to just follow up, and then when Councilwoman comes back, she can jump in. That was basically the point that I was trying to get to. If there's no clear research or data that shows where we are now and what's happening with not having space, but when you look at the data that you guys did show, it shows that the increase has to do with dabbing and edibles. So, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because that's what I saw, that there was an increase in the device, in the way that kids are using, and that has to do with dabbing and edibles. So if we know we have a state that has legalized recreational, and we know we have people, millions of people coming here every year to do that, and then you have the personal cannabis consumer, to me, it makes sense to have safe spaces for people to smoke, as opposed to saying, well, no, we don't want to do that because kids are going to do it more. I agree with Councilwoman Citibaka, and I wish that you guys can get this research that exists. I think that smoking has already hit a tipping point. And so I think the concern is around how are children using it. And then secondly, when you look through the hospitality bill, there is no way that a person can see inside and see what they're doing. The rules are very strenuous around advertising, people being able to see people smoking, and then in addition, the odor. And so I think that some of those things are already taken care of. And while it's very important, not very important, it's the most important that we put the health and the safety of youth first. I think that we don't want to, attach the two things together without really having, when it comes to hospitality, without really having evidence that that would be the case. And basically what I'm hearing from you is that all the evidence that you're saying is based on alcohol.
Just to chime in and clarify, I think I'm really talking specifically around density and kind of the number of outlets where one can purchase marijuana, either through hospitality or through retail sales. And the impact that has, the impact that has on usage trends. So I am not attempting to speak specifically to kind of the specific impact of hospitality licenses, but really just the impact of increasing licenses in any one area. So it really goes back to that saturation issue again.
Sarah,
and to be thinking carefully about that.
Sarah, I think really raised a really important point though, which is that in the environment, because it's not that we have no hospitality in Colorado. It's just that we have informal, right? And I think that to that end, to the extent that consumer behavior, when we talk about normalization, right? I think a very important part of the normalization is normalization of the behaviors we'd like people to engage in, right? We want to show how do you do this correctly. So I think to the limited extent that there has been cannabis tourism, and I mean, anyone who's seen CNN or 60 Minutes knows that that's happening in Colorado. I used the classical cannabis events as an example. You can't model the behavior you want unless it's there to be modeled. And that's why it's so important to move forward with these license rules. If we're trying to remove the behavior of people consuming in public places, if we're trying to discourage the behavior of people over consuming, if we're trying to prevent people from consuming things that they are not informed about because there's no one there to tell them how to use the product, the way you do that is you have a place where there is two very important motives to make sure that the consumer is becoming informed on how to use the product, how to store it safely, how to monitor levels of intoxication, and how to plan for their safety. And that is a licensed facility who has a license obligation to make sure that maintaining a safe environment, and a profit motive to ensure that those consumers have not only enjoyed themselves, but that have taken that behavior on with them. So I think it's very important that if we are talking about creating the model of how to use this product, because all of our kids are going to grow up in the world where this product is available because it's legal now. So that's happened. So if we want to have an opportunity that they're seeing adults model the behavior we would want them to engage in, if they choose to make that choice once they become an adult, that behavior must be modeled somewhere. And that's where I think a licensed facility for hospitality comes into play. And that's why it's very important. And I think it's oddly a unique opportunity that it melds so well with social equity, because you have, again, a new marketplace, a new opportunity where people are starting from scratch. So it doesn't have to emulate a negative culture of bars or what have you, because that culture doesn't exist yet. It can be created.
So Sean, I'm curious, Truman, has MIG done any research on any data collection about, just in terms of planning for the number of licenses, how many people you think are going to really come in off the street versus the other way? I mean, Sarah, you asked about data, to really encourage the outlet density. But my question is, has industry done any type of business analytics around that hospitality rooms are actually going to pull people that smoke on the street off of the street and into the clubs?
Well, I think that really, that's a great question, Henny. And I think that really comes down to what the city decides to do in terms of making this viable and making it both attractive for business owners as well as the consumers, the people who would come in off the street. Right now we know it's happening in parks. It's unregulated. There's nowhere to consume, both for locals and tourists. And so, I think an I-300 was an abject failure, but if we can get these businesses in there, make it profitable, make it safe, I don't think there's any question that it will be a success. The tour buses, say what you want about them, they were certainly busy. And so there's a clear demand there. In terms of exact numbers, I think that's really in the city's hands here. The only other thing I'll say before we close is, a great piece here that the city has is the needs and desires hearing. I think that's a really good piece to keep for hospitality. Get these businesses to work with the neighborhoods, to address the concerns of the neighborhoods. And that can solve some of your density issue right then and there. Anyway, thank you.
So let me go back quickly. I don't know, Councilwoman Sita Baca, we lost you in the middle of what you were saying last. I don't know if you are back and want to finish your thought.
No, it's been said. I don't think that the needs and desires hearings are the best model as they currently stand. So if we keep those for it, we need to improve upon them because community doesn't have the resources to go up against a company that shows up with their lawyer to cross-examine the neighborhood. And so there's a power differential there that needs to be mitigated if we're going to continue to use those. And I'm indifferent when it comes to, you know, whether or not we do the social consumption areas.
Okay. So Sarah, is your hand raised still? No, you're good.
Molly,
okay.
Real quick, Clarissa.
Clarissa?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is not related to data per se on social consumption because it's clear that we're lacking that data as a community, but there are two studies I'm happy to share with the community from 2020, one from the US Department of Health and Human Services, one from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, both showing that between the years of roughly, these are two different studies, time periods, one between 2002 and 2019, one between 2009 and 2019, both showing that there was a significant decrease in teen and adolescent consumption post-regulation.
Yeah, Clarissa, here in Colorado, our youth use numbers have stayed relatively stable, but what has transitioned is statistically increased amounts of kids dabbing, vaping. Edibles has stayed relatively stable, but the statistically significant decrease in the number of kids that would have smoked traditionally. And the other thing that's another big concern, just so everybody's aware of it, is a statistically significant increase in the number of kids that reported using marijuana in the last 30 days driving high. So the numbers are staggering for the way that our youth have shifted now the type of product to the high concentrate market.
And there have also been a decrease in alcohol, correct, Henny?
I don't know that one off the top of my head. I have enough to keep up with just looking at marijuana products here.
I believe I've had that study. I'm happy to send it over.
You know, one thought is you really don't see people drinking on the street. You know, I would say that when you think about alcohol, people do either consume it in their homes or in a licensed area. And so, you know, I don't think the alcohol industry does it perfectly, but, you know, when it comes to social consumption, there's some pretty good data there.
It's illegal to consume on the street.
Yeah, but for both, for cannabis and alcohol, there's just nowhere else to go.
Well, there's other places to go. I mean, you can. I'm looking at Westward right now from February. They have a long list of places where you can go and consume. So,
are those unregulated places, honey?
I'm assuming so, but they were strong enough.
I'll hit you up for places to go then, and you can make me a recommendation. But Meg is in favor of regulating those.
Yeah, I think that's very much the point, right? Because again, there's no opportunity for enforcement to ensure quality control and ensure product safety, to ensure the product is sourced locally. Because we know for a fact, if a business is not licensed, we know for a product those products can't possibly be sourced legally. Because even if they began life legally, they're illegal now because it's not a licensed business, right? So I think that is a very important point that we are undermining the legitimacy of a regulatory framework by continuing to suffer the exact opportunity, which, by the way, the classical cannabis with the Colorado Symphony, we were one of the first participants in this, unwittingly, of course, at the time. But so, you know, we're not talking about that everybody here is some fly-by-night. We're talking about major cultural institutions in the state who have walked into this trap because they read Amendment 64 the way a layman would, which is not, as we all know on this committee, the correct way to read it all the time. So that is why having a licensed way for people to understand how the rules work, and then from there can model the correct behavior is so important, because otherwise you're just undermining the entire system.
So I'm gonna stop there for a second. We have, I think, 4 people that have signed up for public comment, so we're gonna take those. And then we'll hopefully have a couple minutes to reconvene here at the end and have any closing thoughts. So let me see. We'll start with our first, and I think Abby is going to help us unmute these folks that want to provide public comment. So Abby, I hope you're ready for that. But the first person to provide public comment is Samantha Walsh, and we'll set a timer for 2 minutes and give you, as soon as you start, we'll set the timer.
All right, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, Molly, because I can see you, but okay, great. My name's Samantha Walsh, representing Simply Pure, as well as the Black, Brown, and Red Badged Coalition, which is an organization of minority owners within the cannabis industry in Colorado. Just a few comments. One, and I'll be very quick. We certainly support some effort for a funding mechanism for a interest-free loan program or grant program to go to social equity candidates, and examining all the funding opportunities presented. We really like the ideas put forward by MIG about transferring some of those fees over from law enforcement to the fund. For the lottery, we support option B, as well with a recommendation strongly coming from Denver Excise and Licensing to City Council to re-examine the zoning. And lastly, on hospitality, I sort of think it's ironic that we just got out of a discussion in social equity talking about concentration of these businesses in poorer and minority neighborhoods, and then you guys immediately jump into a discussion literally doing this exact same thing with hospitality and with these untenable zoning and setbacks. So I don't understand why the city can say in one breath that has no control over the zoning or setbacks when it comes to marijuana dispensaries. I can understand with cultivation, those need to be in industrial areas, but as far as dispensaries, there's a lot of flexibility there. I mean, I can literally walk every 5 feet in Denver and hit a bar. It doesn't make sense that you would put these sort of restrictions and zonings on hospitality in the name of, we're worried about the kids, when use in Colorado has stayed stagnant with children. In some cases, the health survey has come and said that it's increased lower. And particularly with a very involved industry that has been extremely proactive in education campaigns around youth use, and we can continue that. So what you're doing is you're forcing these businesses, which are, by the way, the primary opportunity outside of delivery, which you've already demonstrated is going to be very complicated with the transporter licenses, for social equity applicants to get into the business when they don't have that capital support that they need. And so we have to be more liberal with these setbacks on hospitality. And I would recommend not really looking at proximity restrictions, but really looking at where people can put them and if it's a desirable business or not.
Thank you, Samantha. So our next public speaker is Gina. I don't think we have a last name, but Gina.
All right, we can go.
Are you there, Gina? Or are you not wanting to speak anymore?
Hold on, sorry, I'm just trying to find her in here and unmute her.
Okay.
Hi, sorry about that.
Okay.
So my full name is Gina Kramuko. I'm the CEO of the National Association of Cannabis Businesses. And a lot of you mentioned about what the industry is trying to do for social equity candidates. And a lot of the trade associations are giving free memberships, which gives this network opportunity, and also trying to form mentorship programs for the social equity candidates. And also Green Flower Media is trying to put together a course which they would provide free certificate education to some social equity members as well. And I think that just as a whole, this is a much larger issue than just with the Cannabis Association. I think the Cannabis Association is looking at, hey, there has been this war on drugs and it has affected the social equity candidates, and we need to do something in order to lower that bar into the industry. And, there have been a lot of conversations, and even we have sent to you directly social equity recommendations that we thought would be helpful for you to look at. So there are people in the industry who are really trying to get this. And the way that cannabis is taxed in Denver and many other states and cities, you know, a lot of that money can go back to these communities and also to be able to support these programs that we're trying to implement, even the program you're trying to implement right now. And I know a lot of your members also indicated that we're lowering the bar, but we're not just giving this out to people who would not qualify. And, you know, this 51% of majority needs to be minorities, you know, should not only include just one individual, but it can include a group of individuals, and really trying to get more people involved and into these industries and have that opportunity and bring it back to the communities, where you also support individuals who are in these communities to be hired by other cannabis companies. And I think that that is definitely what people are trying to do.
2 minutes, Gina. So.
And, I didn't know if I was timed out.
Finish up, you're at time, but if you want to finish up.
Okay, but just that, you know, in the industry, they are definitely trying to support minorities and social equity candidates.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 3 more. Next is Rita.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. It's Rita Tsaluk, Yuma Way, the coffee joint. I'm just listening in presentation, and there's a couple points I want to make. Number one, about investments. Being 51% of social equity, I don't think we need to ask for city or state to pitch in, especially now when money is so tight, because I'm sure that 49% investor will be able to do that. In regards to zoning, I don't think that certain areas, cheaper areas, let's just say cheaper real estate, have zoning is different than other ones. But and I'm speaking from the standpoint of being real estate broker. I think the reason that there's some areas have a different type of real estate. Older areas have smaller lots, and it's easier to get cannabis properties that just smaller size. If you're going down to suburbs, then you have larger lots than owned by larger shopping centers with national tenants, and they're not open for cannabis. So changing zoning really wouldn't help. Changing distance requirements possibly, but you guys mentioned changing zoning, that wouldn't really make difference. But I think where the difference also is that there's some neighborhood associations are more friendly than others to cannabis businesses. And that's why in certain areas, you're just not able to open cannabis businesses. So just want to make sure for everybody to keep that in mind. And my last point, for social consumption, as much as you guys think that it will be in demand, I'm still having my opinion that it's very difficult to maintain. It's going to be non-profitable for the most part, even the one with sale. We don't have proof of it either way, but it's certainly not going to be as much as in demand that I think everybody's thinking. So I don't know if a lot of reasons, but thanks so much.
Thank you, Rita. All right, 2 more. We've got Joe Megacy and then Jordan Wellington.
Hi, thanks everyone for the opportunity to speak in public comment here, and thanks for all the work excise and licensing and the members of this group have put into these important issues. I want to talk predominantly about the delivery proposals, and I just want to say I think that there's a way that we can craft the implementation of this state bill where it's a win-win-win-win for all the stakeholders here. I think we can craft a program that has meaningful social equity advancements, particularly with the transporter licenses. I think that this is a new permit type that will generate significant new revenue streams for the city of Denver, particularly in the current environment. So I think it's certainly a way to increase tax revenue and fee revenue for the city when it's obviously very needed right now. I also think that these deliveries permits also present an excellent opportunity for employment. I know many folks low-skilled folks are struggling with employment right now and have lost their jobs due to the pandemic and the economic downturn. So I think there's an excellent opportunity for further jobs. And then also, finally, I think this is certainly a way to help provide the cannabis industry's patients and customers with a safer method for obtaining their medicine or product as we head into a lot of uncertainty related to the pandemic too, especially in the fall season here. So, I think that there is a way to craft a, win-win-win for all of these things around. If we have some exclusivity or preference around the transporter licenses, we certainly support that. But we also think that, dispensaries should have some ability to come online and have some limited deliveries at the same time as well. I think you can attach some sort of a community outreach mandate plans that require those dispensaries to, do targeted hiring in areas disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, do some education about the industry and outreach in those communities, and also, do some philanthropic spending and good corporate neighbor partners in those communities as well. And I think that's a way and then if you also attach a fee to those dispensaries that may be doing some limited delivery as the social equity applicants make their way through the application.
That's your time, Joe.
We can also be generating money. Those dispensaries that choose to get a delivery permit can be generating money that can go directly to the social equity applicants as they go through their exclusivity period on the transporter licenses. But once again, thanks again for all the work the city has put into this. We're looking forward to seeing the final ordinance and policy on this and moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Jordan, you are up. You have 2 minutes.
All right, thank you, Molly, and thank you, Abby. I just want to note I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a citizen and resident of the city and county of Denver. I want to specifically touch on reducing the density and concentration of hospitality businesses. Although the slide cites issues identified from alcohol use, the city has overridden these types of concerns in favor of creating community spaces and giving alcohol-consuming citizens of Denver opportunities to congregate and socialize. Instead, we celebrate the opening of these new businesses and try to promote our city centers to become attractive for adults to use alcohol in a responsible manner and socialize. This includes things like promoting our downtown area or places like the Stanley Marketplace, Union Station, and other community centers. The city went as far as to even support common consumption for alcohol. In contrast, for marijuana hospitality establishments, they're not allowed to have persons under the age of 21 in their facility. Consumption cannot be visible from outside. So marijuana hospitality is going to have an even smaller impact on youth use, overconsumption, and consumption rates than alcohol. But those concerns are set aside in favor of creating community spaces and allowing adults to enjoy their lives for alcohol in our city. So the question I have is, why is this entirely different when it comes to the cannabis community? Why are concerns about alcohol density overridden in favor of things like common consumption, but marijuana, the approach is the opposite? Why is it community building, place making, and a cool business model for alcohol? It's a good thing that we celebrate, but it's a problem that needs to be solved for the cannabis community. I would just say that I hope one day that cannabis the community in this city, and specifically I'll say make it very individual. I hope one day my wife and I can go out to a restaurant that caters to our community as opposed to alcohol consumers, because we don't have that, 6 full years after the implementation of legalization. So I would really appreciate some consideration about fairness in this issue and understanding that the cannabis consumers of Denver deserve the same opportunities as alcohol consumers have been given by our city. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. We'll go to one more person that just signed up for public comment, and then we'll close thoughts for just a minute. So Shannon Thunder.
Thanks so much, Molly, and thank you to everyone who's been on the working group and working on this over the last 6 months. We really appreciate your thoughtful conversations around this issue. We did want to make a quick comment about medical delivery and the importance of patient access to medicine. And really thank you to Art for the call out earlier in the discussion. Especially as we're moving back into cold and flu season, and in light of how COVID-19 has changed realities for people with health concerns, we do ask Denver to keep patients in mind. The type of patients that we're working with in other jurisdictions that are allowing delivery are, as you expect, they're homebound due to illness or disability, they're residents of nursing facilities, or they're people that just otherwise don't want to commute and leave their homes to receive their medical cannabis from their preferred dispensary. We are disappointed that patients still do not have access to medical delivery in Colorado's largest jurisdiction. And we hope that excise and licenses will keep in mind the unique and important needs of patients when developing this policy. We do think patients are important. Access to medical cannabis is important. And the 11,000 patients in Denver, we hope on behalf of those 11,000 patients in Denver, we will hope that you will keep them in mind. Certainly not advocating for two different structures for delivery, but just as you're, figuring out, I think what we're predominantly talking about in delivery here is rec. We do really think that this is an important service for patients to be able to access at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we're 8 minutes over, so we'll wrap it up here. What I want to just close it with, well, I guess a couple of next steps real quick. As far as next steps, one, just submit written comments. I know there was a couple of questions that were on the slides that we didn't get to today, so I really encourage you to submit written comments. We read them carefully and take them into consideration as much as everything that was said here today. So encourage you to take the time to read through the questions. There's a template out on our website that makes it pretty easy to enter or to put in some public written comments. So encourage everybody, both work group members and members of the public, to go ahead and submit those comments. As far as next steps, you guys have given us a lot to think about and to take into consideration. So we'll be, sharing back more information with you soon. I can't give you a definite timeline. We have some things to get through and some decisions to make, and the drafting part is hard. But we'll be back in touch with you soon. And if you're not already signed up for the Marijuana Information Bulletin, I encourage you to do so. That's the most sure way that you will hear information about what's next. And then, of course, obviously, it has a full legislative process, which we always will encourage you to provide input during that process as well. So my final thought is just thank you. You guys have been awesome and have been really thoughtful and deliberative and insightful with everything that you've shared with us. And so we appreciate your time and your dedication. And thank you. Ashley, do you want to add anything?
No, nothing except what I said to begin with, and just thank you, Molly. Thank you for your leadership on this.
Thank you. All right, well, feel free to reach out, anybody, anytime. Ashley and I are always here to chat more, and we'll be in touch soon. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thanks, Molly.
Bye.